My husband looked every important guest in the eye that night. But when it came to me, he acted as if I'd never existed. Then something happened that no one in that ballroom could have predicted. That I'm so glad you're here. Stay with me until the very end, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I truly love to see how far this story reaches across America. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 66 years old, and after 38 years of marriage, I thought I knew exactly who my husband was. That Friday evening, we were attending the annual charity gala hosted by one of New York City's most influential corporations. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand ballroom. A string quartet played softly in the background while waiters carried silver trays filled with champagne. Everyone there seemed confident, successful, and perfectly dressed. Before leaving home, I had spent almost an hour getting ready. Not because I wanted to impress strangers, because my husband had looked at me that morning and said, "Tonight is important. I need you beside me." Those words stayed with me all day. I chose the emerald green dress he had bought for our anniversary 5 years earlier. It wasn't the newest dress in my closet, but he once told me it made my eyes sparkle. I even wore the pearl earrings my late mother had left me, hoping he would notice them during the drive into Manhattan. He barely spoke. I assumed he was nervous about meeting investors. I never imagined he was preparing to erase me as soon as we entered the ballroom. His entire personality changed. He smiled, laughed, shook hands, introduced himself to executives, board members, and politicians. "Richard Carter," he said proudly. "Wonderful to finally meet you." Then another introduction. And another. Every single time I stood quietly beside him. Every single time. He pretended I wasn't there. At first, I thought perhaps he simply forgot. Then I heard him introduce another executive's wife. "This is my beautiful wife, Susan." The couple smiled warmly. My husband smiled back. Then he walked away, leaving me standing alone in the middle of hundreds of elegantly dressed strangers. A few minutes later, he returned. His voice was calm. Too calm. "Evelyn," he whispered, "would you mind waiting near the reception table for a while? Some of these conversations are complicated." Complicated. Such a polite word. A word that somehow made me feel smaller than I had in years. I forced a smile. "Of course." I watched him disappear into the crowd without looking back. Standing there by myself, I suddenly realized something. For the first time in nearly 4 decades of marriage, I wasn't standing beside my husband. I was simply standing where he had decided to leave me. And only a few moments later, the CEO walked through the ballroom doors. The instant his eyes landed on me, he stopped walking. The entire ballroom seemed to pause. Not because anyone knew who I was, but because everyone knew who he was. The CEO rarely attended public events for more than a few minutes. People described him as a man whose schedule was planned 6 months in advance. Yet there he stood, completely still, his eyes fixed on me as though he had just recognized someone from another lifetime. I instinctively glanced over my shoulder. Maybe he was looking at someone behind me. There wasn't. Just me. Around the room, conversations began to fade. Glasses stopped halfway to people's lips. Even the musicians seemed to lower their volume. Then I noticed my husband Richard had gone pale. Not embarrassed, not confused. Afraid. It was the first time all evening that he looked directly at me. His forced smile disappeared. He took 2 hurried steps toward the CEO, stretching out his hand before the older man could reach me. "Mr. Harrison," Richard said with practiced confidence. "It's an honor. I'm Richard Carter." The CEO gave him a polite nod. Nothing more. His eyes never left mine. Richard laughed nervously. "My wife is just waiting over there. She's not really involved in the business." The words hit me harder than I expected. Not involved. After 38 years of standing beside him. That was how he introduced my existence. I lowered my eyes for a moment, refusing to let anyone see the hurt on my face. Then I heard slow footsteps coming across the marble floor. They weren't heading toward Richard, they were coming straight toward me. Every step the CEO took echoed across the marble floor. No one spoke, no one moved. Hundreds of eyes followed him as he walked past politicians, celebrities, and executives. Without stopping for any of them, he came directly toward me. For a brief second, I wondered if I should step aside. Surely he couldn't be looking for me. I was just a 66-year-old woman standing alone beside the reception table. When he finally stopped, he was only a few feet away. His expression softened. There was something strangely familiar in his eyes. Not recognition from a business event. Something much older. Much more personal before I could say a word. He smiled a genuine smile, the kind that reaches a person's eyes, then to everyone's surprise, he extended his hand. Mrs. Carter. I blinked. Yes. His smile grew even warmer. I can't believe it's really you. Around us, whispers spread through the ballroom. Does the CEO know her? Who is she? Richard stood frozen several yards away. I had never seen fear written so clearly across his face. The CEO ignored every whisper, ignored every curious stare. He looked only at me. I've been searching for you, he said quietly. My heart skipped a beat. Searching? For me? He let out a soft laugh, almost relieved. For nearly 12 years. The room fell completely silent. Even I could barely breathe. Because I had absolutely no idea why one of the most powerful CEOs in America had been searching for me all this time. For a long moment I simply stared at him. I'm sorry, I whispered. Have we met before? A gentle smile crossed his face. Not in the way you remember. Those words pulled me backward through time. 12 years earlier, Richard's company was barely surviving. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom home in Westchester County. Every month felt like a balancing act between paying the mortgage and keeping Richard's small consulting business alive. He worked around the clock. Did I every evening. After finishing my own bookkeeping job, I sat beside him at our kitchen table surrounded by invoices, spreadsheets, and unpaid bills. He often joked that our dining room had become a second office. Most nights, we stayed awake until after midnight. Not because we wanted success. Because failure wasn't an option. One rainy Tuesday, Richard rushed into the house carrying a thick folder. His face had no color. Evelyn, he said. If we lose tomorrow's presentation, the company's finished. He handed me the proposal. I spent the next 6 hours reading every page. Something didn't feel right. One financial projection contained a mistake. Not a small one, but a mistake large enough to destroy every bit of confidence the investors might have had. Richard was exhausted. He didn't even notice so I quietly rewrote the presentation myself. I reorganized the numbers, simplified the charts, prepared answers for questions the investors were likely to ask. When I handed him the finished binder just before sunrise, he kissed my forehead. You always save me, he whispered. The next morning, he walked into that meeting alone. He never asked me to come with him. And I never imagined someone inside that conference room would remember the woman who stayed invisible behind every success. The ballroom slowly came back into focus. For a moment, I had forgotten where I was. The memories of that tiny kitchen, the sleepless nights, and the stack of financial reports faded as I looked into Mr. Harrison's eyes. He smiled gently. I knew you'd remember eventually, he said. I shook my head. I remember helping my husband, but I don't remember meeting you. You didn't, he replied. At least, not face to face. He glanced around the room before continuing. 12 years ago, I was sitting at the far end of that conference table. My breath caught. I was leading the investment committee reviewing your husband's proposal. Richard's shoulders stiffened. The CEO continued calmly. Frankly, we were ready to reject it. A murmur swept across the ballroom. I still remember opening the revised presentation early that morning. He smiled at the memory. The numbers were flawless. Every risk had already been anticipated. Every difficult question had an answer waiting for it. He looked directly at me. That wasn't Richard's work. Silence. Absolute silence. My husband lowered his eyes. The CEO took another step closer. After the meeting, I asked Richard who had prepared those revisions. I slowly turned toward my husband. He never looked back at me. He smiled, Mr. Harrison continued, and told us he had worked through the night by himself. The words landed like a stone in my chest. For 12 years, I had believed we shared that success together. Instead, he had quietly accepted every compliment, every promotion, every award, without ever speaking my name. The CEO gave me a look filled with respect. I never forgot the truth. And tonight, I finally found the woman who deserved the credit. No one applauded and no one whispered. The silence inside the ballroom carried more weight than any standing ovation ever could. Richard finally found his voice. Mr. Harrison, he began, forcing an awkward smile. There must be some misunderstanding. Evelyn helped me organize a few notes, but the project was still mine. The CEO slowly turned toward him. His expression remained calm, but his eyes grew colder. No, Richard. He paused just long enough for every person in the room to feel uncomfortable. I've spent 12 years reviewing that proposal. He lifted a leather portfolio from his assistant. I keep this because it reminds me of the day I almost overlooked real talent. He carefully opened the folder. Inside was a yellowed copy of the original presentation. Next to it, the revised version. He raised both documents for everyone to see. The first draft contains 23 calculation errors. He placed it back down. The second draft corrected every one of them. He looked at me. And do you know what convinced me these weren't written by the same person? I slowly shook my head. The CEO smiled. The handwritten notes. He slid a single page from the folder. Blue ink, neat handwriting, small circles around the mistakes. Questions written in the margins. My heart stopped. I recognized every word. It was my handwriting. I kept this page, Mr. Harrison said softly, because I hoped that one day I'd be able to thank the person whose wisdom saved a company worth billions today. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Richard's face lost every trace of color. The CEO stepped beside me. This company was built by many people. He looked directly at Richard. But history should never forget the people who were left out of the story. For the first time that evening, I wasn't invisible anymore. For several long seconds, no one dared to speak. The page with my handwritten notes rested in Mr. Harrison's hands, and somehow it carried more authority than any title or trophy in that room. Richard suddenly stepped forward. Evelyn, he said, forcing a smile. Why didn't you ever tell me you remembered all of this? I stared at him in disbelief. Remember? I asked quietly. Richard. I lived it. A few uncomfortable laughs echoed through the ballroom before fading into silence again. He cleared his throat. I think we're making too much out of an old presentation. We were a team back then. A team. The word lingered in my mind. For years I had believed it. Until tonight. Mr. Harrison turned toward Richard. A team shares success. His voice was calm. A team also shares credit. Richard opened his mouth, but no words came. The CEO looked back at me. Mrs. Carter, after that meeting 12 years ago, I asked my staff to locate the woman behind those revisions. I felt my heartbeat quicken. They couldn't. He smiled apologetically. Your husband told everyone you had retired, that you wanted a quiet life away from business, and that you never wished to be contacted. I slowly turned toward Richard. His silence answered every question. 12 years. 12 years of opportunities one never knew existed. Mr. Harrison reached into his jacket and removed a simple white envelope. I never stopped looking. He held it out to me. This was meant to be delivered a long time ago. My hands trembled as I accepted it. I hadn't opened the envelope yet, but somehow I already knew. Everything was about to change. My fingers trembled as I looked at the white envelope. The room was so quiet that I could hear the soft crackle of the paper as I carefully opened it. Inside was a single letter folded neatly, along with a gold business card bearing the Harrison Global logo. I looked at Mr. Harrison, confused. I don't understand. He smiled. You will. I unfolded the letter. The date at the top stopped me cold. April 18th. 12 years ago. It had been written only 3 days after Richard's presentation. I began reading aloud. Dear Mrs. Evelyn Carter, although we have never met, your remarkable insight and financial analysis changed the outcome of our investment decision. We would be honored to invite you to join Harrison Global as a senior strategic consultant. I couldn't finish the sentence. My vision blurred. A position created for me. 12 years ago. The CEO nodded gently. It was the highest consulting offer our company had ever made to someone outside the organization. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Someone whispered, that position launched dozens of executive careers. Mr. Harrison continued. We called. We sent letters. We even hired a private investigator. His eyes met mine. But every message came back with the same answer. Mrs. Carter is not interested. I slowly turned toward Richard. His face had become completely expressionless. He knew he had always known. Every opportunity, every letter, every phone call, never reached me. Mr. Harrison stepped closer. I can't return the 12 years that were taken from you. He paused. But I can still honor the future you deserved. And for the first time that night, the entire ballroom stood and applauded. Not for a CEO. Not for a billionaire. But for the woman whose name had finally been spoken. The applause continued for what felt like forever. I wasn't sure what overwhelmed me more. The sound of hundreds of strangers applauding, or the realization that my own husband had kept me silent for 12 years. When the room finally grew quiet, Mr. Harrison turned toward the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, I've spent my career investing in businesses. He paused. But the greatest investment I've ever seen was never listed on a balance sheet. His hand gently motioned toward me. It was a woman who believed in someone else's dream so completely that she never asked to have her own name on it. The room erupted into applause once again. I lowered my head, trying to hold back my emotions. Mr. Harrison smiled. Mrs. Carter, 12 years ago I offered you a position. He reached into his jacket once more. This evening, I'd like to offer you something far more meaningful. His assistant stepped forward carrying a dark blue folder embossed with the Harrison Global seal. This is an appointment to serve as senior strategic advisor to our executive board. I stared at the folder in disbelief. I'm 66. A few guests smiled warmly. Mr. Harrison smiled even wider. Wisdom doesn't retire. It becomes more valuable. The audience laughed softly before applauding again. Then his expression became serious. And because your original recommendations helped create billions of dollars in long-term value, our board has unanimously approved a special equity grant in your name. The ballroom fell silent. Even Richard looked stunned. Mr. Harrison placed the folder gently into my hands. It was never charity. It was always yours. Across the room, Richard took one hesitant step toward me. For the first time in decades, he looked like the man who had everything, and suddenly realized he was about to lose it all. Richard slowly walked toward me. The confident businessman everyone had admired only an hour earlier was gone. In his place stood a man who suddenly looked much older than his 68 years. Evelyn, he said quietly, his voice trembled. I never meant for this to happen. I looked at him for a long moment. It was strange. For years I had imagined what I would say if he ever admitted the truth. Now that moment had arrived, and I felt almost nothing. Mr. Harrison took a respectful step back, allowing the conversation to become ours alone. Richard swallowed hard. I thought I was protecting my career. His eyes filled with regret. I kept telling myself I'd make it up to you someday. I asked only one question. When? He stared at me without answering. When the company became successful. When we moved into the bigger house. When you accepted another award. Or when you stood 5 feet away from me tonight, pretending I didn't exist. Each question landed heavier than the last. He lowered his head. I was ashamed. I nodded slowly. No, Richard. You weren't ashamed of what you did. You were afraid someone would discover who really deserved the credit. The silence that followed felt endless. Several guests quietly looked away, and no one wanted to witness another person's deepest regret. I held the blue folder against my chest. I spent 38 years helping you become the man everyone respected. I smiled gently. I don't regret helping you. I regret believing that love required me to disappear. Tears filled Richard's eyes. I'm sorry. They were words I had waited decades to hear. But somehow, they arrived too late. I gave him one final smile. Not a smile of victory. Not a smile of revenge. A smile of peace, because forgiveness didn't mean I had to go back. I looked at Richard one last time. Then I quietly turned away. Not because I hated him, but because I had finally learned to choose myself. Mr. Harrison walked beside me as the applause slowly faded. Mrs. Carter, he said warmly, our board meeting is Monday morning. He smiled. I hope you'll take your seat at the table this time. I smiled back. For the first time in a long time. I think I'm ready. As we walked toward the ballroom doors, dozens of guests stepped aside. Some shook my hand. Others simply nodded with quiet respect. Not one of them looked at me with pity. They looked at me as an equal. Just before I reached the exit, I paused. I glanced back one final time. Richard was still standing exactly where I had left him, surrounded by people. Yet completely alone. I whispered to myself, sometimes life doesn't give you a second chance to fix the past. It gives you a first chance to live your future. Then I walked out, without looking back. Monday morning arrived with a quiet sunrise. For the first time in years, I wasn't getting dressed to stand behind someone else's success. I was getting ready to build my own. When I walked into Harrison Global's headquarters, the receptionist smiled and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Carter. The board is waiting for you." Those simple words meant more to me than she could ever imagine. As I entered the boardroom, every director stood to welcome me. Not because they felt sorry for me, but because they respected what I had earned. Mr. Harrison pulled out the chair beside him. "This seat has been waiting for you for 12 years. I smiled and quietly took my place. A few weeks later, I heard that Richard had resigned from his company. We never argued again, we never blamed each other. There was simply nothing left to say. Sometimes the loudest ending is silence. People often ask me if I regret the years I spent helping someone else achieve their dreams. My answer is always the same. No, because kindness is never wasted. But I did learn one lesson that changed my life forever. Never allow your loyalty to make you invisible. The people who truly love you will never ask you to disappear so they can shine. Thank you for spending these moments with me. If my story touched your heart, I'd love to know where you're watching from, and remember, it's never too late to reclaim your name, your voice, and the life you deserve.